Hi, this week we're going to go unscripted. Okay, that's not working out, so let's go back to scripted. Welcome to week 9, On Deck Bible Moments. This week we're going to look at historical events, maybe spark some interest in the history or the events of the Bible, Old and New Testament. I remember being in high school and some classmates said that they would like to major in history when they got to college because history never changes. Once they learned everything they needed and got their degree, they wouldn't have to worry about learning anything else, unlike math, which changes all the time. History changes when you find something. A lost book, a sign, a gate, maybe a city under a city, and so on. Most of the times, though, when they find things, it just verifies something we've already known. I've already talked about Adam and Eve in the garden. In the garden, there was the fruit, fresh water, animals. It was a regular resort, someplace you might want to book for a vacation. You probably had a lazy river going through there. We talked about how Adam and Eve ate the fruit thinking they would be as great as God, though that didn't work out. They did gain the ability to know what was right and wrong, and as a punishment, no more Garden of Eden. People have searched for this garden and have not found it. The Bible was more concerned about the creation story, telling us about Adam and Eve, instead of leaving us some kind of forever GPS to find the garden later. And after the flood, with Noah, a lot of things were rearranged on the earth. The landscape got changed. One of the things out of the Garden of Eden story was that there was a punishment. Like I said, they were thrown out of the garden. When I got into my later teens, I remember parents, because who listens to their parents when they're younger, but listening to parents talk and saying, well, don't punish the child because they did something wrong. They're at a impressionable age. Don't withhold their allowance or put them in a timeout or tell them they can't go play outside, because it's a growing experience right now, and it would affect their ability to grow up happy. Well, how do they learn right from wrong if not when they're children? I always thought it'd be funny if the angels were looking down at Adam when Adam was given the job of naming the animals. The one angel might have said, what's Adam doing today? And the second one would say, oh, he got to name the animals then. That one's a duck. And the first one would say, well, what's that one over there? And he said, well, that's a duck too. Oh, well, what's that other one there? And he said, that's a goose. How about the one up in the tree? Well, that's a bird. And that one over there? That's a bird. Oh, he's not doing a very good job at this. What's the big one? Oh, that's a rhinoceros. Well, I can't even spell rhinoceros. We should get God. The second angel would say, oh yeah, let's go get God. Well, where is he? The first one would say, really? God's everywhere. And let's remember that when we're doing things, that God is everywhere. He knows our thoughts, and He's waiting to talk to us each and every day. Second thing I wanted to mention on the doing something wrong. Remember we talked about Jacob and Esau, and how Esau lost his inheritance. He decided to go off, stop following God. He had no money. He wasn't going to wait around for God to figure this out, to correct things. Abraham kind of did the same thing. God promised him a son that would turn into a nation later, that he would be blessed with many, many children. He decided not to wait on that promise. He said, I really, don't want to wait. I'm going to do things my way. And he had a child with another person other than his wife. From that, we have conflict in the Middle East today. Seemed like something simple, something maybe not a big deal at the time, turned into a terrible thing, and there was a punishment for him not waiting on God's promise or waiting on what God told him to do. I'm not sure if a lot of you are familiar with the Jordan River. You're probably very familiar with the Red Sea parting. When God's people left Egypt, they went through the Red Sea. The Red Sea closed in on the Egyptians, and they were able to escape. But in the book of Joshua, It says, "The priest will carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth, and as soon as their feet touch the water, the flow of the water will be cut off upstream, and the river will stand up like a wall." So there was another river that parted in the Old Testament. Again, many of you are familiar with the story of Goliath and how he was brought down with a sling and the stones. Forgive me if I mess up this word or this name. Ishbi-Benob, one of the descendants of the giants, whose spear weighed 300 shekels of bronze and who was armed with a new sword, thought to kill David. This is found in 2 Samuel. But David was saved when someone else killed the giant. So there's more than one giant story in the Old Testament. At this point, I want to present a statement that I once heard concerning biblical history. To what benefit was it for the disciples, the followers of Jesus, to have the Bible be true? Was it a conspiracy? Now don't shut off the video yet. Did they take historical records, documents, and add it to every event something to do with God? So if there was a time period of rain, they would say God blessed the land. If there was a time of drought, they would say God was angry over something or the people weren't following God. Remember, though, that the disciples were living the New Testament. So if you're planning a play for power, fame, or financial gain, you want to do that now. It's something you don't want to bank on 50 years down the road or something in hopes that it all works out. But the New Testament tells us over and over again that you are to work for a living, not to be dependent on others. Many occasions it's made known that the followers would pay back the money that was given to them, and that money was usually for travel or food, maybe lodging. It was for following God. So where would the benefit of a conspiracy come into play? Did they run around the Holy Land burying things for people to dig up later to verify biblical history? That seems unlikely, since a lot of things have been found in the last 50 years or so. That would be bad timing on their part. Many places have changed names as well over the years, so for the disciples to sit down and begin to write a history for the Bible, they would have to make up some 4,000 years of history. Also, one good point is, why would the enemies of God's people make up history to match God's people's history? Why would they add into their historical notes some of the same events that happened? That doesn't make sense. If the church was helping them out with money, that money, like I said, was used to spread the good news, that a Savior had come to save all and give us eternal life. The Bible was not fully published till years and years after the disciples were gone. So much for royalties. Many were killed, jailed, beaten, and cast out of cities they visited. I'm not sure that I would die for a made-up story. Unlike some preachers today who preach on Sunday and attend a few meetings during the month, and receive housing, medical, retirement, insurance, travel expenses, utility expenses, educational expenses. That one's always been confusing to me. You've graduated, and you know the Bible, and you know how to convey the biblical facts in there through preaching. I'm not sure what there was to send you away for 2 or 3 times a year to learn. But my point is, how did we get so far away from what the disciples were doing? They went around, they preached the gospel. They wanted to equip the church members on how to do the same, how to act, how to listen to God, and they wanted to reach out to the communities and the nations. God's kingdom, that he came to be King of Kings, was the total opposite of what was going on then and what goes on now. When King Herod heard that another king was being born, he didn't have all the facts, but he was threatened. He was the king. I can do whatever I want to do. So he had all the babies killed. Through history, we have had Hitler and Stalin, Napoleon, etc. They had a kingdom or a country based on whatever they wanted to do. Their way was the way it was. God's kingdom, though, is one of sacrifice, not to gain power over everyone, but to free humanity, do away with oppression. His kingdom was not one of a self-centered leader, but somebody that would lay down their life for his people. He stressed, love one another, and that was very important. Not take what is not yours. So there's no conspiracy here. You may think that's only my opinion, but I feel that Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Paul, James, and on and on and on didn't have any plans for fame or power or riches. They didn't run around and bury stuff in the sand. They took the history of the Old Testament and they wrote the New Testament. The names of many places and the cities had changed, so only using some kind of original documents would they know all the names and places that they were writing about. Did you ever play the sentence around the room? You might have 12 or 14 people around a room, and you start by saying something, Sally wore a yellow sweater early in the fall. By the time 14 people or so in the room pass that around, it ends up sounding like Solomon tore his yellow sweater ear when he fell down. So the disciples were using written words. They couldn't depend on the words being passed on for generations, especially over 4,000 or more years. I don't want the past eliminated. I learned from the past. Eliminating the Old Testament or the New Testament is not really allowed. The Old Testament and the New Testament are part of the whole Bible, and as a matter of fact, in the New Testament it mentions you can't take away or add to the Word. Historians, archaeologists, researchers can confirm it. It teaches us truths on how to handle situations, how to wait on the Lord for answers, to have patience. We could use that today instead of trying and convicting somebody immediately after we watch a video. It leads us to salvation. It answers our questions. It gives us advice on how to live a blessed life. We find peace, and it teaches us how to treat others. It shows us when we don't listen to God, sometimes terrible things can happen. Over and over and over, there are examples in the Bible for us to live by. A real conspiracy is something that benefits people now, twisting and turning the news, paying people to do bad things, or that word, enable people to do bad things. Erasing history, lighting a flame under a cause to undermine the country, putting fear into the American people. I'm always been interested, I think I mentioned this before, as you turn on the news, all you get is the bad statistics, the ones that have passed away from the virus. You see clips of things that have been the same news clips for the last couple months. In our country, 7,000 people die a day. And over the last 90 days, that would mean that some 63,000 people would have passed away, or 2.5 million a year. That's staggering. That's something I didn't even want to know. That happens every year. But while sifting through the news, who benefits now and for the next several years from the chaos? How does one incident roll into hundreds of incidents? How have they all become related to each other? And I don't mean to water down or lessen any life lost, or to say that one person should be raised up over another person, but the news media have caused this. I remember several times when a movie was coming out, and maybe they said September 4th, and it seemed like months leading up to that movie release, the news shifted. So if it was a movie about a plane, all of a sudden there was more plane incidences in the news. Maybe a crash, somebody saved a plane by flying it safely to the ground. A plane company was going out of business because it had faulty pieces, mechanical issues. And it always seemed like it was building up in the news to get people interested in the movie. I think we have that today. I think there's many news stories sitting on the back burner waiting to be put to the forefront when it's a good time to use them. So what makes this book not true? That's what I want you to think about this week. The second point I want to make is when we're all through this, will we learn from history? When all the cities quiet down, will there be more jobs, more happiness, more prosperity? Will the land be healed? Will all be equal? I mentioned last week about we have to start with our hearts. Somebody on the news today, this is Wednesday, actually said you can't change people's hearts. You can only change policy. Second thing I want to leave you with today is at the end of the day, every person who passes away will suddenly find out whether there is a God or not. Keep reading the book of truth. Keep reading the good news. We'll see you next week for testimonies.